Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ntabiseng Kotsokwani. I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Welcome to the celebration of the Open Access Week. Our topic for today is Open for Whom? Equity in Open Knowledge. I'm sure most of you who are following the open access movement have seen this tagline everywhere. So as AfLIA, it wouldn't be right as the leaders in Africa not to have a webinar or some sort of celebration for the Open Access Week. So this is our way of celebrating Access Week, Open Access Week. As you know that Africa needs access to information, particularly scholarly information. We need knowledge. For sustainable development, for innovation, for creating knowledge. You know, you need knowledge in order to create knowledge. So for us, so that we can participate in the fourth industrial revolution, we need access to knowledge. Fortunately or unfortunately for Africa, we lack funds. Most of our libraries don't have enough funds. So open knowledge and access to open access knowledge is very critical for us. So today we have two brilliant speakers from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. We have Jill Claassen and Lena Nyahodza. They will be talking to us and sharing their knowledge for the next 55 minutes or so. So I will quickly try to introduce them as best as I can. If I've left out something, they will bear with me because we want to get to their presentation. Lena is a scholarly communications manager at UCT, and she is also an advocate for open access. As librarians, we all should be advocates for open access. So she works with open scholarship as a democratic agent that supports social justice. Okay. If you need more on Lena, please go onto the webinar, onto the AfLIA webinar website, and then you can read more on her bio. And our colleague Jill Claassen, she's also from University of Cape Town. She's the section manager of the scholarly communication and research. She's been there since 2014. She's also responsible for scholarly communication and publishing. And she's also instrumental in implementing the UCT open access policy by making UCT scholarly communication discoverable and open to all. They have very interesting numbers. Open UCT has already got 25,000 scholarly works that are openly available. So you remember earlier in the year we had a webinar on open textbooks, and we all enjoyed it very much. We hope to learn more from this webinar today. So UCT has got open journals and open monographs and open textbooks. I will hand over to Jill just in a few seconds. Jill is also serving as an officer for SPARC Africa. You know, SPARC Africa is having a workshop in UCT in December, if I'm not mistaken. She will correct me. And in this webinar, I know we always get this question: are the slides going to be available? The answer is yes, the slides will be available. Is the recording going to be available? Yes, the recording is going to be available via the YouTube channel, AfLIA's YouTube channel. So everybody who has missed out can or go back and click on our YouTube channel and then subscribe so that you get the updates and then you get all the webinars that you have missed out on. Okay, and then we are streaming also on Facebook, on the AfLIA's Facebook page. Everyone who's missed out on subscribing to this webinar can, with their friends, go onto their Facebook. It's just gone live now, and please go and listen there. If you get problems with connection or something, you can quickly go to your phone and follow us on Facebook. You are going to, all the questions that you ask, please ask them on the little box in the middle, the Q&A box. Type it there. We're not going to be able to answer everybody's questions, but what we will do our best. If your question and someone else's questions are similar, we normally try and put them together and make it one question. If we don't get to your questions, I already apologize in advance. As you can see, our speakers' email addresses are displayed. Please write them down now. I'll give you 2 minutes to quickly scribble them down, so that if we haven't answered your questions, you can email them. I'm giving you permission. I hope they will forgive me for doing that, to email them and so that they can answer your questions. You can also have the discussion on our Facebook page, so that we can continue with the conversation, because this is, as we have said, it's open access week. So we have the whole week to have chat and talk about open access. I'm now going to hand over to Jill and Lena.
Thank you so much, Ntabi Singh. And a special thank you to AfLIA for allowing Lena and I to contribute to International Open Access Week. So we're going to start our presentation now. Open access is the unrestricted access to sharing of online scholarly content, free of cost and free of most copyright and licensing restrictions, for anyone who can benefit from reading and using the research. When access to research is restricted behind a publisher paywall, only the privileged who can afford the subscription will have access to that knowledge. While Africa accounts for 15.5% of the world population, the money available for research and development accounts for only 1.3% of global expenditures. This is one of the reasons Africa remains at the bottom of the global list for the creation of knowledge, technology, and innovation. This is exacerbated by the vast majority of African scholarship being invisible to the global online community. In 2018, Elsevier reported, using its tool SciVal to measure the research performance of countries and research institutions, that Africa generates 1% of the world's research. This near invisibility of Africa's research is interpreted that this continent does not contribute to the global publications pool of knowledge. One of the main contributors to increasing scholarly output is access. However, many African researchers remain cut off from access to current research debates because of exorbitant subscription costs against the backdrop of shrinking library budgets. As knowledge is a public good, access and the sharing of research in Africa is crucial, but needs further fundamental principles to uplift and empower our society. Africa's open access agenda needs to be underpinned by philanthropy, egalitarianism, social justice, equity, inclusion, and diversity, as well as access principles. If access is needed for African researchers to make a significant contribution, the kind of knowledge produced would be important. Our continent faces very different societal challenges to that of the global north. Research is needed into healthcare, nutrition, sustainable energy, environmental protection, agricultural mechanization, and education, which will contribute to social development, innovation, and economic growth. By participating in research that is relevant for Africa, we will be striving to produce solutions that will address the challenges that beset the continent. Thus, new voices will need to find their way into disciplinary conversations, reaching new audiences, both academic and public, and impact existing and emerging fields of scholarship and practice in a transformative way. This year's open access theme, Open for Whom? Equity in Open Knowledge, highlights this important fact, which has already been mentioned. Providing access to scholarship may be sufficient to produce knowledge in the global north, but access to the kind of knowledge that provides societal solutions is needed in the global south. This is especially evident in Africa. Open access in Africa should be driven by a social justice agenda to enhance equitable provision and access to knowledge for the development and empowerment for all those who have been marginalized. I will focus on the Open Access Week theme by looking at infrastructure, and Lena will emphasize participation. We need to have a digital economy that aims to achieve inclusivity and equity. However, some of the barriers include physical infrastructure, such as electricity or the lack thereof, and poor connectivity due to socioeconomic imbalances. The global society is increasingly energy reliant, resulting in fast-paced energy demands, especially in the form of electricity. The Sustainable Development Goal 7 is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. However, the then chair of the Africa Progress Panel, the late Kofi Annan, remarked that 2 in 3 Africans lacked access to electricity, and that amounted to 621 million people in 2015. It was projected that it would take another 60-odd years for every African to have access to electricity. Besides the low supply of electricity, the quality of Africa's electricity supply is poor. On average, in sub-Saharan countries, some level of power outages occur every 4 days. Therefore, it is not surprising that unreliable power supply is a key factor that interrupts the sustainable usages of online information resources. Africa has the most expensive internet in the world. Goal 9 of the Sustainable Development Goals strives to increase access to information. However, there are digital barriers such as insufficient or slow connectivity and the high cost of bandwidth. In the 2018 State of ICT report, it was found that more than half of the world's population is now online. However, it is in the statistic breakdown between the global north and global south that the digital divide is magnified. In the global north, 4 out of 5 people are online. Conversely, in the global south, 4 out of 5 individuals do not have access to the internet, and that amounts to 80%. Another finding was that internet access via a mobile device demonstrates sustained growth, mainly because of the global drop in prices. Almost the whole world population, including Africa, now lives within range of a mobile cellular network signal. The report concluded that most people access the internet through a 3G or higher quality network. Improving the infrastructure on the continent is taking place, as illustrated by the 2 following examples. The first example is through the African National Research and Education Networks projects, Africa Connect. Africa Connect 1 was a pilot that focused on improving access to high-capacity connectivity for Southern Africa. Africa Connect 2 expanded to the West African region. The upcoming Africa Connect 3 project will advance the functionality of African research and education networks for the whole continent. The second example is on a smaller scale. It is using the internet through EduRoam when physically away from universities. EduRoam is a wireless roaming service that provides free internet access to the global research and education communities. A South African initiative is allowing the university community to access the internet through EduRoam at 57 public libraries in Cape Town. Accessing EduRoam at the public libraries is beneficial to those students who are least able to afford internet access at home and live the furthest away from universities. To conclude this section, reducing the cost of bandwidth, as well as increasing the connectivity and providing stable electricity, should be the priority for governments and funders. The result will be the removal of infrastructural access barriers to increase equitable sharing of knowledge in Africa. However, as information specialists, these external factors would be outside of our control with what we can do to improve circumstances. I will now move on to skills to support the infrastructure to ensure knowledge is inclusive and equitable. This does fall within our role as information specialists. The lack of ICT skills is a significant impediment to people who want to access the internet. Research shows that as online activities get more complex, fewer people undertake these activities. There is a general lack of ICT skills which point to a serious constraint on the development potential from the global south. Thus, there is a desperate need to develop communities of practice for the efficient and effective use of ICT in Africa. An example of building communities of practice to breach this digital divide is the LipSense initiative. This initiative focuses on strengthening local and national services to support open science and research in Africa. The collaboration is between IT specialists, information specialists, and researchers, organized by the West and Central African Research and Education Network, or WACREN, and fosters further regional collaboration with ASREN and UbuntuNet Alliance. 3 workshops in 3 African regions were held within the last year to establish communities of practice and growing capacity in the Africa Connect 2 project. Some of the outcomes of these workshops include metadata guidelines for repositories, national and institutional policy templates, and plans for a regional repository hosting service. There will be other LipSense initiatives in Africa Connect 3. This project starts in January 2020. The focus of Africa Connect 3 will be on establishing a framework for sustainable open access repositories, including hosting a research data management platform and journal development in Africa. On a much smaller and fledgling scale, the University of Cape Town Libraries is developing an open access publishing platform for use by any academic and research institute on the African continent. Currently, there are few local journals and monographs and textbooks on the platform. In growing the platform, the Durban University of Technology was used as a pilot site for the publication of a journal. Training was given by UCT libraries at DUT to manage their own journal. There are immediate plans to train and build capacity with the University of Namibia Libraries IT specialist and librarian, who will manage 3 of their local journals on the same publishing platform. There are future plans to host annual workshops to build capacity among library staff. Staff will be trained to use the platform for the publication of books and journals. Thus, it is hoped that through the establishment and development of communities of practice, possibly through SPARC Africa, the IT skills gap in Africa will decrease. Also, an increasing number of information specialists can contribute to publishing local, relevant content by knowing how to publish journals and monographs. I will now move on to open systems that support open sharing. As mentioned, if there is insufficient support for scholarly infrastructures, it will hinder opening content and data can be under threat. Open source software can prevent this from occurring as it is the freely accessed, shared, used, and or modified software. Some benefits to open source software are: there are several online international community forums available for support. Documentation is available, such as blogs and online tutorials. Developments can be added and shared in GitHub. In the research landscape, there are several open source softwares that are being used internationally and on our continent to support open sharing. I will focus on a few of these applications. One such application is the management of repositories. According to Open Door, the Directory of Open Access Repositories, there are 216 repositories in Africa, with DSpace being used 80% of the time. The content in these repositories are in the main in English. Whilst all institutions on the continent may not have registered with Open Door, the low number of repositories could be indicative of one of the critical barriers to supporting open source software, which is IT support. The skills gap can be minimized by IT specialists participating in the LibSense initiative, for example, to have a network of like-minded people providing support through knowledge sharing and skills transfer, thereby intentionally addressing the continent's skills shortage. Another application which assists in journal publishing and monographs and textbooks is Open Journal System and Open Monograph Press. These are two applications with very similar functionalities, as they were both developed by Public Knowledge Project in Canada. This application has a robust online forum and up-to-date online tutorials to assist both library and IT specialists to capacitate themselves. OJS and OMP provide an alternative open access publishing model to traditional publishing. The platforms assist at every stage of the refereed publishing process, from submissions through to online publication and indexing. It has varied file formats, which allow downloads to take place during times of connectivity, making the content accessible on an anywhere, anytime basis. These applications allow for the inclusion of multimedia, such as audio and video clips, in publications to enhance the learning experience. A recommendation would be to establish communities of practice across the continent, so that more African information and IT specialists are equipped to provide the technical support to use this application on a wider scale. There are many open science applications that can be mentioned, but I will mention two very briefly: Open Science Framework and Zenodo. The Open Science Framework provides free and open source project management support for researchers across the entire research lifecycle. As a collaboration tool, it allows researchers to connect and share their work. An example of the use of OSF is the preprint open access repository Africa Archive. The repository supports preprints, postprints, code and data, and allows submissions from local African languages. Zenodo is an interdisciplinary open data repository service that shares and stores scientific research in any format. Zenodo allows you to link uploads to grants from more than 11 funders, such as the European Commission, National Science Foundation, and the Wellcome Trust. I will now hand over to Lena, who will focus on participation in equitable access to knowledge.
I'd like to just thank Ju for a comprehensive explanation on the state of infrastructure, clarifying what is available, who has access to specific infrastructure, and what struggles we have on the continent. To interrogate the theme open for whom, equity in knowledge, we need to look at our information needs and what we aim to achieve on the continent so that we can take action. When I visited AfLIA and African Union websites, which I think have the best interest of the continent in terms of development, it was explicit that we've got specific information needs, that is unrestricted knowledge to support sustainable development, which is engagement in socio-economic activities and development that can improve quality of life and that of future generations without causing ecological constraints. The question is there open knowledge to orient every citizen on environmental and climate issues, and the knowledge should be relevant considering age, gender, sexuality, literacy levels, and other factors that could affect growth and development on the continent. Availability of knowledge is also critical for Africa to partake and benefit from the fourth industrial revolution. In this process, as we adopt disruptive technologies and emerging trends like robotics, artificial intelligence, and others, we should question the inclusivity of these technologies and how they cater for equity. There is only a limited amount of African knowledge, as Joe has shared. Therefore, we need open knowledge to support transformation. This means we should increase visibility of African content through participation in knowledge creation and equitable dissemination of content. We should adopt inclusive platforms that cater for unique needs to achieve equity in open access publishing for authors. And we need to create awareness of inclusive open access practices which represent voices of the marginalized. These needs are at the center of our discussion because Africa is facing diverse challenges, as we have just indicated. I would like to highlight some of these challenges again for the purpose of discussion on the way forward with equity. There is evidence that the majority on the continent are living in poverty, and we have high unemployment rates with high percentages of youth being jobless. Most of these experiences are due to historical political experiences of colonialism and apartheid, which provided limited education opportunities at tertiary level. This resulted in socio-economic imbalances among races and gender within Africa. When we raise issues of gender, we cannot assume every member of the community embrace heterosexual values. Therefore, we need to be sensitive of issues of sexuality, which I will further explain. There are also challenges with food security due to various causes, including climate change, urbanization, and literature predicts that there will be challenges to feed the world population by 2050. The issues of food security are critical as these will affect other development projects. On the hierarchy of needs, as we may know from science, food is a priority and people cannot function if they are hungry. This means we need more open research on agriculture and climate change to inform the agricultural sector on how to increase yields. Africa is also grappling with health issues like malaria, HIV/AIDS, and many others. And it is interesting to note that when I pursued two African journals, that is the African Journal of AIDS Research and African Journal of Malaria and Tropical Diseases, I discovered that they are both subscription journals. These two journals promote the commodification of content as access is via subscriptions, whereas African libraries have restricted budgets for subscription. The Malaria Journal does not even support green open access, which means authors who publish in this journal cannot share their content. Any copy of their content cannot be shared in an institutional repository or a subject repository, and this excludes Africans. With these two examples, we can start asking questions like, open for whom? Who has access if research published from Africa is not accessible to Africans? Lack of visibility of African knowledge calls for deliberate efforts from information specialists and librarians on the continent to adopt open source software and commit to lifelong learning to constantly develop relevant skills that support alternative publishing models to improve visibility, accessibility, and sharing of knowledge at continental level. African research does not have to be published in global north journals that are meant for profit. There are also other political issues that we might want to note. It has been acknowledged that academics and researchers from countries that are listed under economic sanctions by the United States of America are barred from publishing in United States journals or to engage in academic activities with research institutions in the US. Placing such boundaries on knowledge sharing can exclude knowledge that could save lives, and publishing within countries or establishing open access publishing platforms, maybe at continental level, can support sharing of useful knowledge created by researchers banned from publishing in global north environment. I am going to talk about gender issues, and this is kind of going to be an extensive discussion, as I feel that there is need for attention of issues of sexuality, as these are not really considered. In Africa, the challenge of gender inequalities is quite complex, and it extends to critical issues like gender-based violence and abuse of women and children's rights. Cultures like patriarchy and other religious practices fuel such issues. When we talk about gender, it is critical to note that gender refers to a socially constructed characteristic of women and men, whereas there is an issue of sexuality. And if we may try to think in our environment, this is an elephant in the room, and the issue of sexuality is not publicly discussed because most African cultures and religious values are biased towards heterosexual, which excludes the LGBTQ plus communities. Some African countries have anti-gay laws, and this can influence discrimination of fellow human beings, and we may not cater for their information needs in the process as we create knowledge. And when we think about equity, we might exclude such groups. We need to accommodate individuals despite their sexual orientation. Expression of sexuality relates to biological, physical, emotional, social, or spiritual feelings and behaviors. This is important for identity and one's personal growth. And if we leave out people because of their sexual orientation, it means we will not promote equity because there is always a group of people that is left out. The issue of gender becomes also complex as those defined as women are completely left out in terms of science. Then if women are left out in terms of science, then if we look at LGBTQ, it means this group is completely silenced because it is not a norm to talk about LGBTQ within our communities. Culturally, heterosexual values are held high within African communities, and Stephen Winkler noted conditional censorship of queer representation from media in Africa, which needs deliberate efforts from information specialists to include members of the community, irrespective of their sexual orientation. There is minimal representation of women in journal management, editorial boards, editorial and peer review processes. This means their voices worldviews and experiences will not be well represented in science. And as a result, if we say talking about the LGBTQ community is a taboo, then it means this group will be completely left out. The research landscape worldwide is dominated by male researchers, and in the context of South Africa, it is white male, and they are the ones that are highly rated researchers. This homogeneity in science raises questions of gender representation of science. And if we notice also on the African continent, according to literature, female researchers are left out, are excluded in research, whereas the majority workforce in agriculture is represented by women, which again calls for participation in mentorship by the leading white or leading black male researchers to promote inclusivity in open knowledge. The mentorship should create an environment of inclusive academic freedom for both women and the LGBT community through establishing a code of conduct that questions sexual harassment, stigmatizing behavior and attitudes towards fellow human beings. These issues call for open access as default, as they are part of the SDGs. Challenges of access to information can be also added to some of these challenges that include funding, subscription. In the post-apartheid era, there has been a call for every African university to become an instrument for development and be relevant in the global knowledge economy. This requires equitable access to knowledge, whereas traditional scholarly communication industry exists in a dominant environment that support the commodification of knowledge through copyright restrictions, journal subscriptions, and there is also high cost of textbooks, which is an educational barrier for students coming from low-income communities, as they cannot afford purchasing such resources. Open access was introduced to remove barriers like subscriptions, copyright restrictions, and other costs. But unfortunately, open access has been hijacked by commercial publishers with the introduction of APCs, which is in any case reducing the capacity of authors from the global south to openly share research in leading international journals. The demand for APCs will worsen the situation of lack of knowledge visibility on the continent. Lack of data is also a challenge on the continent, whereas data play a critical role in knowledge creation and community development. And there is also an indication that there is very limited government data that is freely accessible to the researchers. How then can Africa achieve its 2063 agenda, Africa we want, with such challenges? The Africa we want depends highly on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is equity to knowledge that leads to sustainable development for us to achieve an integrated, prosperous, and democratic continent driven by its own citizens, representing a dynamic force in the international arena. The issue of dynamic force brings Africa to assess the information needs of the SDGs. Do we have knowledge to do with hunger, poverty, good health? And the SDG 4, quality of education, is also critical for achievement of other SDGs. And this calls for the redefining of the SDG goals within an African context. With quality education, we should ask questions. What does education mean for Africa? Do we refer to formal or informal education? What is literacy for us? Does it mean speaking in English? How do we cater for the communities that do not have basic education and those that do not speak English? We should also ask where we are in terms of good health and well-being. Is health care inclusive or non-discriminating? Do our primary healthcare facilities accommodate issues of sexuality? Do we cater for everyone without discrimination and stigma? In real sense, Sustainable development should not only apply to the highly educated African communities or to specific classes or groups. It is critical to note that challenges posed by high levels of marginalization on the continent, lack of visibility of knowledge, demand high levels of activism from librarians and information specialists. Activism must be intentional and deliberate in positioning libraries as democratic agents of transformation through adopting inclusive open platforms that prioritize inclusivity, diversity, and equity to knowledge. This requires the adoption of relevant infrastructure to create conducive, collaborative environments for mentoring and empowering the marginalized groups and encourage inclusive, equitable participation in knowledge creation. I am emphasizing participation because if equal parts participate, then worldviews are shared and we can be able to get a platform to understand what are the issues that are within every group. Information specialists need to be proactive in science production, creating knowledge on technical aspects of publishing, and engage in research on the unique needs of diverse groups. Research on data management and sharing infrastructure should also be prioritized on the continent, as this is a critical tool for development. Libraries should also prioritize working with other stakeholders, including academics and researchers from other disciplines, IT specialists, as well as government bodies and non-profit organizations, lobbying for policy change and improvement of bandwidth, electricity, access to electronic devices and applications that support equitable participation, dissemination, and access. Academic, public, and special libraries need to collaborate with other information specialists and library schools on the continent to constantly enhance curriculum to promote open scholarship, as this is very important for us on the continent. Information stewards, I am using the terminology stewards for the reason that I think anyone who has got interest with information can understand the need for creation, the need for diversity, the need for inclusion. These information stewards need to understand diversity, inclusion, and equity so that it can be clear in order to guide people in achieving this during creation, dissemination, and access. When we talk about diversity, it means there is good representation. If you look at the picture I am pointing now, there is good representation in numbers of all communities, including the previously marginalized, women, and LGBTQ+. We also take an extra step to look at the entire population with men included and make efforts to bring on board community members living with disabilities. When we are together, this is inclusivity. Sorry, this is diversity. And inclusion would go an extra mile when everyone is on board. We have diversity. Then we start working on inclusivity, which means everyone on board is given equal opportunity to participate with no prejudice. We are united. We are working towards the same goal without prejudice, stigma, and undermining any other member of the community. Information specialists need to work towards eliminating dominance in the scientific field and achieve diversity and inclusion for progression in equity to open knowledge. We have highlighted issues of supremacy and culture like patriarchy that exacerbate misrepresentation in science, in leadership, research processes, and the issue of male dominance in science also reflect in editorial boards, journal management, and also research processes. If white male and black male communities are dominating the research landscape, this would mean that male editors are bound to reject papers from female researchers as they do not share similar worldviews and experiences with these groups. Therefore, diversity is important in research processes as libraries adopt new trends of library publishing. The focus should be to capacitate diverse individuals, irrespective of sexual orientation, through skills development, to support journal management, peer review processes, authorship skills, editorial processes, and technical skills. The stage of editorial assessment and external peer review needs to have anyone who is managing an open platform to at least look at these processes to prioritize diversity and inclusivity, to neutralize biased attitudes and behaviors that may affect representation in science. And to cater for equity, participation, and dissemination that will promote improved access, we need to look at the availability of resources depending with individual needs of the members on board for them to reach their maximum potential. Equity is not equal provision. As you can look to where I am pointing, these people have got equal resources, but as we can see, not everyone is reaching their full potential. They cannot all take action at the same time. But with equity, we have to provide according to each one's needs so that participation is promoted from every individual. So this means accommodating environmental, social, economic, physiological needs of diverse communities with no stigma and judgment. This includes provision of electronic devices and applications that support participation and access for the blind, deaf, and community members with autism and other health issues. I think some other health areas that are neglected is to cater and support for people living with mental health. This calls for provision of knowledge through braille, audio, animation, gaming to allow participation and access. With equity, information stewards need to reach out to local communities by including signs in indigenous languages to promote education, knowledge exchange, and citizen science, which is participation of people from outside established research organizations in diverse research activities, including data collection and analysis. In cases where services are complex, communities of practices should be established to identify specialists that will offer training and support for the communities that are participating in publishing services and knowledge creation. Libraries should prioritize inclusive and equitable publishing services of new research through Diamond Open Access, which has no cost implications for authors and readers, and supports self-archiving services to increase visibility of African knowledge through Green Open Access. This should also include availability and accessibility of data to all researchers and to all people that have projects of in community development. These are some of the barriers for communities to achieve equity. Cost barriers for ICTs and bandwidth, issues of stigma that I have already elaborated, language barriers, diversity of languages in Africa. We have African indigenous languages, French, Portuguese, German, Arabic, and Afrikaans, whereas the emphasis is to use English as a medium of instruction in research communication. Electronic devices and applications should promote equity considering all various groups, and we need skills that can support users and information specialists as we adopt new infrastructure. So we need to understand softwares and integration and development issues. We also need to develop public skills and also copyright and open licensing education. Then as we proceed to prompt action, we need to look at these questions. Open for whom? Implying who currently has access. Is there equitable access to knowledge? Who are the diverse communities around us and what are their information needs? Are the available technologies inclusive in creation and access to knowledge? Can all diverse communities participate in content creation so that all voices can be represented? How can we support their content creation? What cultures do we have and value? How inclusive are these cultures? Whose voices do our cultures represent? What contributions can libraries and information specialists make. And in this case, we need to look at what everyone, including other information organizations, can do to support equity to open knowledge. Support should nurture activities in both content creation and dissemination in a more equitable way. I am going to just summarize these 2 slides, and I will not complete everything for the reason that maybe it will be too much for everyone, but it will be easier for people to revisit this and read. But it's not a prescription that these are the activities that must be done, but it can be an initiative stage for discussions of what else can be done. When we know our gaps as a continent, we then collaborate in promoting inclusivity, equity in open knowledge through various activities like engaging in research on relevant ICTs, establishing support system for diamond open access, open data services, and guidelines for metadata services. Libraries can support green open access through Sherpa Romeo, a database for self-archiving guidelines, and engage in advocacy work, lobbying for infrastructure improvement, as well as establishing communities of practice to sustain publishing services on the continent. It is also important to engage in research on best practice that suit our African continent. For instance, we should be asking, if we talk about a standard, are we talking about communicating science in English? I am going to hand over to Jill for conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lena. So in conclusion, the question of this year's Open Access Week theme, Open for Whom, brings to the fore that access to knowledge is experienced differently across the world. In Africa, this is especially relevant as open access to knowledge requires more than just sharing. In response to the continent's socioeconomic challenges, social justice must be the open access principle that drives development. Through the lens of equitable access for a diverse, inclusive continent, Africans can participate in creating new knowledge to contribute to improving societal challenges. In other words, make open access the default to creating knowledge as it forms part of the Sustainable Development Goals. This transformative need for the participation of African scholarship, previously almost invisible, will shift African scholarship from the near invisibility to being openly visible and accessible, from being on the periphery of the global knowledge economy to now a part of its epicenter, allowing a circulation and exchange of global scholarship. The marginalized African voices should create African knowledge that include local content in multiple African languages, addressing gender imbalances and diversity in all its forms, including sexuality, as well as producing scholarship around indigenous knowledge. An important question to address is, who should these African voices be who create knowledge? African authors, as well as editors and editorial boards, cannot continue to be dominated by a small, white, male, homogeneous group, but rather should achieve equity that is representative of the continent's culture and values. African knowledge will be open knowledge, bringing about transformation, as it will assist in promoting sustainable development through a commitment to social progress, environmental balance, and economic growth. African libraries have an integral role to play in contributing to making African content discoverable. Through maximizing their skills in supporting and populating open repositories, as well as providing a relatively new service in library as publisher. In other words, libraries and information organizations can support equity to open knowledge through the activities in green open access and diamond open access, as mentioned by Lena. This means that through publishing local content in open repositories and open access publishing platforms, it will be more representative and inclusive of Africa's information needs. African libraries' participation should include participating in the design and implementation of sustainable infrastructure and open software applications that encourage more equitable access. These applications should include finding innovative ways to provide access to scholarship by diverse communities, such as those who have disabilities, and allow access even though electricity may be unstable or disruptions in connectivity. It will be mindful to remember that in order to go far, we need to go together as an African continent in making African scholarship inclusive and equitable. As information specialists, we need to continue to practice Ubuntu, a communal practice in our societies. Sharing and being part of communities of practice for technical support, as well as capacity building and skills transfer, will be fundamental in bridging the skills gap, increasing African scholarship and contributing to driving development on the continent. Ubuntu should also extend to establishing and growing an open access publishing platform through the library as publisher service, as well as further embed institutional repositories for access to relevant local research. An example of sharing and moving together in one direction is the LipSense initiative through the Africa Connect projects. Another initiative is the upcoming SPARC Africa Open Access Symposium in December in Cape Town, South Africa. There are capacity building workshops that will be held on how to manage an open access journal and monograph, as well as an editor's workshop that will assist African editors to develop a credible, sustainable, open access African journal. At the symposium, there will also be a launch of a publishing platform with local content. It is hoped that this platform could be scaled and expanded on the continent with further participation from academic libraries and IT specialists in the near future. I would like to encourage you to take part of the extension for the early bird and register for the workshops and the symposium. I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Lena and Jill. This was very informative. And I like the social justice part because for us African, that's very important. I see, Jill, you have been answering quite a lot of questions, but for the sake of everybody online, I'm going to repeat some of the questions. I'm sorry to do this to you. It's just for the benefit for everyone so that we can get the answers. The first one was, well done, Jill, for this class. Please, who funds Africa Connect and EduRoam? Jill, can you answer that, please?
So I did place the answer in the chat. So as far as I know, in South Africa, EduRoam is overseen by Tenet, which is the tertiary educational network. So that's just in South Africa. So I'm not 100% sure about the rest of the world. Okay. And then Africa Connect would be projects that is sponsored by the EU.
Okay. I think I can add to that because I was part of the people that started with the LipSense. It's IFO and most of the open access movements in the world that are funding, and UbuntuNet is behind the funding of the project, not access to EduRoam per se. But I think there is a move towards making sure that all universities and all, it's basically geared towards universities, that all our universities are smart universities and well connected. So it's going to be a project between the libraries and the universities and the network, people like Sabinet and Workren and all those people. So yeah, that's my addition to that point. Okay, there is another one that you Helena, okay. How do you recommend we approach faculty who feel their best option for publishing in high impact journals? most of which are behind paywalls. Jill, over to you.
So I'll say a bit and then Lena can contribute as well. I believe the best way to convince somebody is through evidence. And so one of the ways to do that would be to take a researcher who has published open access. So it may not be many publications, but one publications or two, and track the views and downloads and citation impact versus an article that has been behind a paywall and that would not have had the traction because it wasn't accessible to everyone. So that would be the one way. The other one would be to have conversations around why we create knowledge. You know, why do we do research in effect? Is it not so that as many people as possible can read our research? Is it not that our research can make an impact to society? Is it not that we go back to research which is all about for the public good? So those would be the initial conversations we would have with an academic and ask them to think about the origins, in a sense, of creating knowledge.
Okay. Lena, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think to add on to what Joe has said, the other way to do this is if there is evidence. We also, when we get an opportunity as librarians and information specialists, we need to unpack impact, because impact, as we speak about high journal impact, your own knowledge, which is closed behind paywalls, might not necessarily have an opportunity to interact with users. Therefore, you might not influence policy development. You might not influence anyone to utilize your knowledge as they are developing projects within classroom. So I think it is the initial discussion of also the origin of research and what is impact, because if it is behind paywalls and we do have challenges of subscription in our libraries, it means your own community where you collected data, they do not have access to that content. And if there's evidence that we are publishing open access, we also have tools like statistics that researchers always want to see the feedback of how their work is interacting with people online. So I think that will be a motivation, although it has got a snowball effect where you start with maybe one academic. If they want to host a journal, if there's evidence that their knowledge is being utilized, people can join the group and collaborate.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question here. Hello, Jill. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on infrastructural issues that hinder open access. Can you please come clear on the SDG 7 and the insight insight it gives to open access? Over to you, Jill.
Thanks, Ntabi. So goal SDG 7 is around providing stable electricity and energy. And that, of course, is directly related to providing connectivity and Wi-Fi. For those of us in South Africa, about a week or so ago, we had some outages. And that meant that students' lectures had to stop, or, if they did online courses or online teaching. Many students flock to our library, for example, because we have a generator. But that was not the case for other lecture halls, and they needed to stop their lectures, for example. So it definitely interrupts connecting to the internet. And that, of course, results in not being able to access online resources.
Okay, thank you very much. Here's another question. I would like to find out if there are support systems for the development of open access systems. for institutions and universities in Africa, particularly Southern Africa. A look at the best performing IRs and open research data management. For example, seems to be concentrated in South Africa, with other countries not doing as well. I hope you get it. I'm not sure who's taking it. Jill, Lena? Do you want me to read it again?
No. Okay. Lena, do you wanna start? Otherwise, I can start and you can continue.
I can basically give an example of what the University of Cape Town is trying to do, because the establishment of a open publishing platform to be opened to the entire continent, it is going to include communities of practice where we identify people who have got skills in specific areas so that we can develop. We have already started training other people on the utilization of the open journal systems. But with the issue of technical support, then we have to include IT specialists who can support us on that. There is already, I think, a network from PKP and other organizations like Crossref, like OCAD, and all these, they work towards integration, and our IT specialists would then support in that regard. We understand that some institutions might not be ready for open journal systems, but the fact that there are so many institutions on the continent who are already interacting with open source softwares like open journal systems, open monograph, and DSpace, and other softwares that Joe has identified, we can still establish a community of practice. And this is an initial discussion we are having. Therefore, I think way forward, we can still find ways to collaborate and assist those that would like to establish new platforms.
Okay, Jill?
No, I was going to touch on communities of practice, which Lena already mentioned. I do know that looking at the some of the initiatives that will be taking place in Africa Connect 3 from 2020 does exactly answer the question around populating institutional repositories and research data management repositories. So I think hopefully it's through the Africa Connect 3 that communities of practice can expand.
Can I also ask Reggie to come in? He's under the name Andy Swa. He can also add some insight on this question.
I was about to ask, to read what Andy Swa said. I didn't know it was Reggie.
It's Reggie.
Okay, he said, or I will read it out. He said, we need to share skills and develop communities of practice to ensure skills development. And then the fundamental purpose of research is to provide a stimulus for change. And if these change agents are behind paywalls, then their contribution is null and void. So that's what he said. So I was wondering who's this intelligent Andy Swa here. Now I know who it is. So I also have a contribution from someone who says, for the last question, we must refer them to the Association of African Universities. There's someone who gives beginners workshop and enables use through OA platform. So there is people who are doing good work. So please, there's quite a lot of nice comments on the chat. So after the webinar, people should go through those and then read them. Okay, I'm going to my next question. I would like to find, okay, hello, Lena. Thank you for the presentation. Can you throw more light on the relationship between open access initiatives and right to information? How can we engage the needed authorities, most especially funding agencies, and persuade their stand in the open access motive to help share knowledge generation when research is funded? Lena, it's for you.
Thank you, Ntabi. I think funding bodies are already engaging in supporting open access because they understand the need of access to knowledge. If I can give an example of our main funder in South Africa has got an open access statement. And if there are also people that are in health sciences, I think their main funder should be Wellcome Trust. Wellcome Trust has an open access statement. And in 2020, it has got a new a new policy where it is not going to allow anyone who has been funded by Wellcome Trust to publish in any hybrid journal. So if the journal you have identified is a closed journal, your funder is not going to allow you to publish, even if you are going to make it immediate open access through an APC, because for them, they are actually disregarding a double dipping. So I think funders are going towards supporting open access, which could be maybe part of the main movements of OA 2020 and Plan S. But we understand that in the global south, we might not be at that level of trying to look at what others are doing in the global north. But I think funders, we need to do a research of what our funders, our local funders are saying about open access, although some of them are talking about green open access, sharing via green open access, but at least they are driving towards policies that are supporting open access.
Okay, thank you. Jill, do you want to say something? Oh,
I want to know if the person knew of funders, if you know, if they could name one or two funders who would be obstructing open access. It would help.
Okay.
Of course, because we open access advocates, we know many of the big funders that support open access. So yeah, even in South Africa, in terms of the funding agency, the national the NRF, which is the National Research Foundation, also supporting open access. So if the person could state which funders they are thinking of, because I'm wondering if it is funders or is it publishers. Yeah.
I'm okay. I think I told everyone to take your email. Maybe they can clarify, or they can just write it down here in the Q&A, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, nice delivery. Please, I would like to ask, when it comes to carrying out legal research, are there open legal research databases emanating from Africa that can be utilized? And I think I need to add, on the first question, somebody said all the examples are from South Africa and Southern Africa. Are there any good examples coming from the other parts of Africa? Anyone?
I can give examples that are happening of promoting open science in East Africa, where people are participating in open maps, where they are mapping their countries to support humanitarian crisis. So maybe there is a bias of Southern Africa because also we interact with open access advocates within the region and within the country. But we know a lot of work that is happening in Tanzania and Kenya in terms of opening up data, geospatial data that is supporting open maps. And I think last year when we shared issues of open data in March, when we were celebrating Open Data Week, we discovered that open maps in Kenya supported humanitarian crisis of female gender mutilation. So many girl children were saved through that that project.
Okay. Any legal research databases that you know of?
For legal research databases, I cannot say much, but I'm not so sure if what I'm going to share is going to be helpful, as maybe law cases might differ depending with law and acts within a specific country. But I just know a publisher, Juta, which could be also biased towards Southern Africa or South Africa. They don't have really open databases, but their embargo period is quite short. After 6 months of publishing, your content, including law cases, can be openly available.
Okay.
So there is an African legal database called AfLIA. It's open, and I'm sure it's well known. And then of course there's a regional offshoot from that called SAFLI. Yeah.
Okay. I was about to mention that because I think that's about the only one I also know. Is it from Rodney? Is it possible for AfLIA to come up with training on citation, impact factors, and journal rankings? Our library service are lately placing a demand on these skills. I'm not sure who do I take this to? Maybe should we take it to AfLIA, or can any of the two ladies say something about it?
So I can talk about, so because I'm from the south part of Africa, my experience is here, but I do think that funders are, they are interrupting the traditional research landscape in that they are the ones who are wanting to track impact. Lena mentioned the Wellcome Trust, which is of course an international funder, but there are funders wanting to not just want to measure citations, so you know how many times your work is used, but they want to measure how your research has made an impact on society. And so there are funders and institutions who have supported the declaration on open on research assessment, and that is to take the journal impact factor away from measuring impact. So look at the article level and of course not the journal. So I do think funders are impacting the way researchers now want to even publish, because when they come to our library and say that they want to know how, what kind of impact they are making, we don't only look at the numbers of the citation analysis. We look at who they are collaborating with, what kind of journal it is the journal an open journal, have they influenced policy briefs, for example, if it's possible to track that. So it seems to be that research now is at the point where measurement is going to come with how society has changed, rather than as a researcher how many citations they may have.
Okay, I think we need to get to wrapping up. How can we get a list of some of the funders grants supporting OA? Anybody? Is there a list somewhere that people can go to that has all funders and grants supporting open access? Jill?
My suggestion would be to look at some of the big international funders, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Look at their open access policy. Look at the Wellcome Trust. Look at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. So those are, of course, the big open access funding policies. And then hopefully through that way, it can then lead to other funders to get to know their open access policies. But no, I don't personally know of a list. I just, I guess, learn and read, and then find out more about open access policies. But maybe if you find out about, just, find out funders' open access policies, a list should emanate from that on the internet.
Okay, I think there is someone who just clarified about the question we were talking about earlier. My question was about funding agencies, but not publishers, their role in open access promotion. Can I give it to you, Jill?
So I've mentioned some open access funders who are pushing the boundary in terms of wanting research to make an impact on society. I've mentioned three: the HHMI, which is the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Wellcome Trust. Those are the three big ones. The one that I know of in South Africa would be the National Research Foundation. Yeah, so
Okay.
yeah, I think funders, just like publishers, know that research has to be open for it to be accessible and discoverable. So if a funder wants return on investment, then they know that the research would have to be open. Lena, do you want to contribute to that?
I'm not aware of any database, but in most cases, when we are looking for funder policies, it will be as per request from a single researcher. And I think maybe we can start documenting when we find out what our funder policy is saying, but I'm not aware of any database.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the last question is the references mainly were from South Africa. I think it's as similar to the first question. Does it mean that Nigeria, West Africa, Egypt, North Africa, East Africa, Uganda are low on open access?
Okay, if I can also repeat what I had said earlier, I mentioned Kenya, I mentioned Tanzania, and that is not what it means at all. I know a lot of activities that are happening in Ethiopia. I know one open access founder of an organization in Nigeria, but it's just the few that I know. But I think a lot of activities, open access advocates and organizations, are many of them on the continent.
Okay. Okay,
So
I'm not sure if,
just add, Ntabi, the person who posed that question has, of course, know that the three countries listed are the ones that would be second, third, fourth, or fifth in terms of research productivity on the continent. And if we know that, access is needed for research productivity, then it would come down to openness of that scholarship. So the countries listed are just behind South Africa in terms of the number of research produced by those countries.
Okay.
So they're well within, they're well within the first high number of countries involved in research productivity.
I also know that Lipsense has done some survey on the open repositories in Africa. So if you go to their website, you will find which countries are participating. And it's not only the Southern African regions. It's because maybe our speakers are from the South. So it doesn't mean that other areas are not doing anything. That's my view. I will just take one comment from my panelists. They say, I don't know whether it's a comment, Dr. Chinwe, or it's a question. Funding in university, but I don't understand, but the library by the day is considered irrelevant except during accreditation. Yes, how can information professional participate in harvesting data and preserving it? Something must be done about the position and attitude of stakeholders to libraries and its evolving responsibility. Okay, I think it was a comment. You can just both have a comment and then we can close. Jill?
Okay, I can.
Oh, Lena, you can go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. For me, I think my last remarks is to be conscious of our environment, and maybe to understand, if we talk about equity, we do not include any other marginalized groups. I think there's a tendency from academic institutions to focus on academic communities, and along the process, I think we will lose support that is required by an ordinary citizen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for participating. I can see now the questions are getting longer and longer and longer, and we're getting more questions. If you want to continue with the discussions, please join us on our Facebook page, and you can, I hope our two speakers will be happy to answer any of the questions you have. Thank you very much, and thank you for your active participation. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.